Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us tonight, once again, Dr. Buck Melton. Welcome, Buck.
Greetings.
You know, we're getting close to the next electoral cycle. I mean, I know that you're modest, and you don't want to put yourself forward prematurely.
Well, speaking of modest, it reminds me of what Churchill once said of, was it Neville Chamberlain? A modest man with much to be modest about.
Yes, indeed. Well, I wouldn't say that, but I know that many fans out in TV land are awaiting a decision on your part, and I hope you won't keep them on tenterhooks for too long. I just make that comment.
What is the German saying? A pleasure anticipated is also a pleasure.
Okay, all right. On that point, I guess we can move along and discuss.
Am I being coy enough here?
Well, yeah, I think the press will soon pick up on this, and we'll get to the bottom of your intention soon enough. Well, we have a lot in the world that's happening, in many places, and one of the events that I think you have a particular interest in it, being a scholar of the Supreme Court and our American judicial system, is the Supreme Court vacancy which has appeared. Is this a customary way things happen about this? The Chief Justice gives, or rather the Supreme Court Justice gives notice, calls the President up, there's a press conference, and then there's time for the President to pick someone. Is this a normal turn of events about the way this has happened?
Well, that's pretty much it. I'm drawn to the fact that several decades ago at this point, when Thurgood Marshall, first African American on the Supreme Court, and prior to that, one of the great civil rights attorneys, announced his retirement. It was in a press conference, and someone asked, well, why are you retiring? What is it? And his response was, well, I'm old. So, that's good enough. There have been occasions, many occasions, when justices have died in office, and occasionally, sometimes quite literally on the bench. I believe Chief Justice, I believe it was Owen Roberts, or was it Charles Evans Hughes, who literally died during oral argument. So,
wow.
These things.
Well, I mean, we've discussed this before in other circumstances about age limits or encouragement of people approaching terminal decades to maybe step aside. There's no statutory requirement for that to happen, is there? I mean,
no, there is not. So now, if you're in a lower court, district court, court of appeals, you can become a senior judge, reduce your workload, and I think that's kind of encouraged. But the idea of the independent judiciary is you can stay there as long as you're able to keep breathing. And there have been occasions when justices or judges have stayed longer than they should, because there is cognitive decline.
Now, you'd like to think, or I'd like to think, that the Supreme Court is a neutral body of very wise men and women that are intellectually capable of charting the society's path in regards to the Constitution, and we can depend on their neutrality and general propriety as they pass judgment on different issues. But I don't think that's the case this day and age, or at least most people suspect it's not. And the idea is, as I understand it, that we have Democratic justices and we have Republican justices.
I wouldn't put it quite like that, but
well, along the line of reasoning, now I hope that's not the case. I hope it's not. And we could talk about that in more detail. But I think the idea was that the Associate Justice left the court in order not to reduplicate the Ruth Bader Ginsburg turn of events, where a Democratic justice stayed on the Supreme Court for their own sort of ego gratification until the very end, and then flipped the court to the other party. Is that what's happening here? Was there some encouragement, or can one say?
It's possible. You have several different things going in, and we need some background here. The late Justice Scalia, and love him or hate him, I personally found Scalia to be a very clear writer, very cogent, I often agreed with his analysis. Sometimes I did not. I think that he wrote one or two of the worst opinions in Supreme Court history, and we're still living with the fallout of that.
Can you name them?
Yeah, the big one is the Oregon, and now I'm having a bit of a senior moment. I can describe the case.
Well, describe
but it was, that a traditional free exercise case, essentially dated from '62, Sherbert versus Werner, and it was a good case that really left the state, the government, out of an individual's free exercise. What had happened in that case was that Sherbert was a Seventh-day Adventist, and she'd made it clear that she would not work on Saturdays, could not work on Saturdays. And then a new supervisor came in and said, well, you're going to have to. And she said, I quit, tried to get unemployment. The state would not pay unemployment, and she claimed this is a violation of my free exercise. And the court said, yes, it absolutely is. You've got a sincere religious belief. It's an undue burden. Well, about 30 years later, in the Smith versus Oregon case, Scalia changed that. He said that as long as this is a general law, or a neutral law with general applicability, that there's no basis for complaint. And that has really, in large measure, gutted a big chunk of the free exercise clause. And I think that his reasoning was bad. I think that the conclusion he reached was bad. But I speak of that exceptionally. That was one of the few cases that I think he just really got abysmally wrong. So.
Well, we can go back to our subject after that.
Yes.
Before we do that, however, we're talking about elderly judges, and you displayed, if I can speak as a physician, one of the early signs of cognitive decline, as do I, and it was very interesting in that you could not remember the name, but
Yes.
you knew the case very well.
Well,
so that's not going to interfere really with your abilities in life, but that's one of the things that happens as the brain ages. It's hard to remember names.
Well, I was going to say, let me put me on the spot there, because I have noticed, I would say over the last year to 2 years, hunting for a particular word. So,
that's the human condition. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's. But on the other hand, you knew the case very well. Thus, you're certainly capable of going forward in life, even with these small little infirmities.
Well, sometimes though, well, as Mark Twain once said, the difference between the right word and almost the right word is the difference between the lightning bug and the lightning. And so sometimes missing one single word in my line of work can be a big problem.
Well, after our little circuitous journey
Yes.
through the weeds, back to our subject here, and I believe you were discussing some of Justice Scalia's
Yes.
virtues.
But so Scalia died suddenly. Others fade out quickly. But there are a lot of factors that go in. There is the high of being a Supreme Court justice.
Yes.
Most of the people who are Supreme Court justices love the job. I mean,
Yes.
it's a very cushy job with a lot of intellectual stimulation among extremely smart people. You're insulated from the hustle and bustle that other politicians, I should say, have to put up with. You're set for life. It's a great gig.
Yes.
And so a lot of times you stay longer than you should. Scalia did point out that most Supreme Court opinions are fairly dry and technical and non-controversial except to specialists. But when you get to the big ticket items, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, and of course abortion.
And affirmative action.
Affirmative
all
action,
on
yeah,
the
all of
agenda.
this. Yeah, this is where the politics really come in. And judging has always been political. John Adams, and I'm rewatching that miniseries, stellar miniseries, if you haven't seen it.
No, I haven't.
Oh, you've got
It's
to.
quite good.
I think it was 2008. Absolutely stellar from beginning to end. But it was Adams who said we have to have, or should seek to have, a government of laws and not of men. Now, I'm an Adams fanboy. I think Adams and the Adams family, as in the John Adams family, is one of the great families in American history. But that's kind of naive, because it's human beings are going to take the laws and do what they want to with them. And judges do that as well. They shouldn't, They're not supposed to, but they do. And they are being more obvious about it all the time in recent generations.
Well, that's not good, is it?
No, it is not. It's not judging. That's being a politician.
Now, one of the things that's disturbing, I believe, is you'd like to imagine that in America we're all one people. We all have a common identity. We all can sort of worship at the same church, the American nationalism, the superiority of our way of life, the many Superman standing there, the American flags in the background, the American way, which is really tremendous.
I hate to tell you this, but several years ago, Superman renounced his American citizenship.
Really? Did he?
He did.
And was it for tax reasons?
Probably not. So, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
Is he now living happily in Cuba?
No, he still hangs out here, but he's no longer an American citizen. Yes.
This is the fictional Superman. This is someone that played Superman, or this is just a little joke on your
Superman
part?
himself. He in the comics.
Oh,
he
in the
renounced his
comic.
American citizenship.
Okay.
Yes.
Now I'm
and
getting
Captain America was revealed as a Hydra agent. So.
Okay. Well, I mean, you're obviously. Your active mind travels to realms unknown to me.
Well, it's an interesting commentary that these symbols that had been taken as unquestionably American, the people who perpetuate these symbols have now become so disenchanted with America, or they become so globalist that they are changing the narrative.
Very dangerous direction, I think, of those opinions. You could say yes, you could say no, you could say what's up. However, I think it's like dropping a lighted match on a floor full of gasoline
Perhaps.
To say, well, Superman no longer is here for us. Where have you gone, Joe DiMaggio? Where is Superman? Where's your home now? Is it in Cuba? Is it in China? How about North Korea? Have you moved there and you're happily there with the North Korean times?
Yes.
Well, all right. On that, enough. But to go to the I guess, an operative point to discuss is that President Biden promised in the electoral cycle that he would put an Afro-American female on the Supreme Court, narrowing the possibility of a person going on there and actually disenfranchising many noble candidates that might be there. And I think if you actually looked at the percentage of people that are lawyers that are Afro-American females, but many of them quite meritorious, but it's a pretty small group of people for such a job. And I think in the past, it was not uncommon to do this sort of sub rosa, to say, well, now we need, in the old days, we need a Western justice, or maybe we need a Catholic justice, but it wasn't so obvious.
Well, actually, it was, and I would say, I'd have to correct you there, that I think that the pool of potential Supreme Court justices of any ethnicity or gender is fairly small, but really the pattern, I'd say really until almost the 1980s, was that these justices they also supervise various circuits. And so there was actually, and it wasn't sub rosa, you tried to make sure that you had a justice for every region of the country to reflect the circuits that justice would answer the phone for if a writ of certiorari was sent up, or a need for some sort of sudden intervention.
Yeah, my comment was not that necessarily there was any problem about finding such a meritorious person, but if there are like, I don't know, 100,000 people out there that might be a candidate for the job, the actual number in that group would be much less, maybe, I don't know, pick a number, 2,000, 3,000, plenty of people. Yeah. But it does restrict the choices to some degree.
Yes. But I'd also, and I don't mean to talk over you, but you have so many ideas coming so quickly. If I don't jump in,
well, you've got to hit them back, I guess. Yes.
But also, I think the word disenfranchised is a little strong. I mean, no one is entitled to be a federal judge. So.
Well, we could discuss that. No one is entitled. The chances many people, that's their life ambition. What I guess I'm getting at, and we could discuss this, is presumably the way that one becomes a Supreme Court justice. Traditionally, it's an Ivy League law school. It's being with great grades and et cetera, and then going to the becoming a Supreme Court clerk.
Correct.
Then being very quickly appointed to a judgeship or maybe some kind of prestigious job, and being groomed at an early age for this. So what I'm sort of saying is the way that things would be traditionally.
Yes.
Where there might be 100 people that had been in that mode of I guess existence, or whatever the number is, and then relatively few Afro-American women in there. But great, that's the way it is. And of course the story is, maybe you need to get someone out of that mode. And I think there's a South Carolinian who is that right? It's an Afro-American that's being touted by Representative Clyburn as the person he's putting forward or suggesting. And would it be appropriate, along with this, to do that? In other words, would it be more representative, or if that's the objective of the nomination, to actually, besides that, get a person that his career has not been in the traditional mode, and maybe has been at a state law school, and then has been a local judge, and really has not so much in the elite up east environment. I mean, comments?
Well, there are different ways of looking at this. So, and I do find this interesting coming from a Harvard man, since Harvard has produced more Supreme Court justices probably than all the others put together. But on the one hand, I think you're right that that the top law schools can become very self-referential, and the collective political bias of the faculty of such law schools tends to be somewhat left of center. How far left of center is open to debate, but certainly not right of center.
Yes.
And so I think the point that you make is very well taken, that you're getting a very narrow segment of the political spectrum that gets represented. On the other hand, and I say this from personal experience of having dealt with several federal judges and Supreme Court justices, that you really can tell that these people made it to Harvard Law School or Yale Law because their neurons fire faster than those of mere mortals. I mean, they can think at a speed and on a level that is almost mind-boggling. And so you would liken being on a high federal court, like the Supreme Court, like the DC Circuit, as brain surgery. Do you want just somebody from Podunk State mucking around in your skull, or do you want the best you can get?
Yes.
And so from that standpoint, and these schools do produce conservative, and Scalia as an example would be one example. Clarence Thomas would be another example. So you do Gorsuch, I think, is obviously, I think, coming very much out of the judicial restraint school. So the process can produce people on different sides of the spectrum.
Well, if you look at the configuration of the Supreme Court, and I think it's the idea is, and it's rather complicated, is law is this sort of pristine, I guess, entity. It's not contaminated by biases, not contaminated by extraneous events, just some crystal pure right or wrong kind of question based on precedent, or how do you read this precedent, A, B, C, and the most brilliant arbitrator of the facts winds up getting the most correct opinion there. And so it's not contaminated by whether your hobby is bird watching or whether you enjoy shooting birds, whatever. I mean, your personal experiences don't play a role in this.
Now, are you being facetious about this?
No, I'm making the point that at least that's an ideal that's not commonly found.
It is not accepted anymore.
So for that reason, you've really turned the Supreme Court into kind of a quasi-legislative arrangement.
I think
so. People, who are you going to vote for? Let's say, senator or vice president, or who are you going to vote for the Supreme Court? And here's some candidates out there, and your candidate will get in there if it's a little bit circuitous as to how it happens. But if you vote for the Democratic person or a Republican person, then someone that will go in there that will you would have basically voted them in, and once they're there, they'll just go with the party line as it exists and represent a particular group of people to the exclusion of everyone else, which is a problem, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So if you've configured a Supreme Court and you're there as the representative of anyone, a particular minority or maybe a mercantile group, I've been put on the Supreme Court to protect airlines or whatever. I mean, I'm the airline candidate. Mm-hmm. And then that's my job in these deliberations. Isn't that a wrong direction for the Supreme Court?
Well, I think it's absolutely wrong, but I don't think, and it may be true, it may be quite possible that in their own mind a judge or a justice would think like that. I do not think that a judge or justice would be caught dead ever actually admitting to that, even if that's what they're going to do.
Of course not.
So. But I think what you're getting at here, I think it's a lot more likely that a justice or a potential justice or a potential judge would admit to adhering to a judicial philosophy that would tend to favor a certain group, a certain ethnicity, a certain economic group. I think there's less reticence about doing that. Now, I will say that ever since Robert Bork was shot down in flames in the 1980s in his confirmation hearings, there is more reticence about doing that than there has been in the past. And sometimes it really does seem like, are you a fool or do you think I'm a fool if you say that you haven't made up your mind on this? I think what you're getting at is when John Adams talked about a government of laws and not of men, he did have that objective reality in mind. And I think we've been sadly disabused of that notion, even though we still talk in those terms. We like to think that the law is some sort of truly objective thing. And so when Sonia Sotomayor was being vetted for the court, she said she would like to think that a wise Latina woman would be able to make a better judicial call than an Anglo man. Well, that indicates that she thinks that the law is subjective and that a different perspective is more or less right. And so it's not a matter of objective truth anymore. It's a matter of subjectivity. And that scares me, and I agree with you on that.
Now, just to continue on the process, the way that confirmations happen and the amount of manure tossed around is just disgusting, I would say that. And presumably, something like that could, although less likely, could happen in the next confirmation hearing. The Republicans may say, well, it's time for vengeance, and we've discovered something. I mean, whatever you have been cruel to small animals, something like that. Do you understand? You let your cat die when you were away at the beach, or whatever things could be produced that would, ad hominem attacks that might be there. Now, some of the problem I have is the precarious balance the country has right now, and the necessity of at least feeling that fairness, whatever that word means, is there in regards to the judicial process. And there will be a lot of neutrality, no matter why you're there. You might be representing the airlines, so to speak, but you're going to be, your real viewpoint is one weighing basic right and wrong that people can understand. And you would be a moral person that reflects the sense of right and wrong that people commonly have. And if you've been tarnished by the confirmation process. And in that story is that the people recognize the Supreme Court is really sort of a quasi-legislative body made up of people that are merely going to find the opinion that supports the airlines, so to speak, and a smart clerk will be able to fashion up an argument. Isn't that true? I mean, you could almost, I mean, you're a lawyer, you've been through the legal process. Certainly some argument can be produced on any subject somehow. Oh, yes. Something can be put there that seems on anything.
Yes.
And say, I'm voting for this because whatever, any reason. The Titanic hit an iceberg.
Yes. Well, you don't get to the Supreme Court unless there are arguments on both sides. Nobody's going to put in that kind of money to get there if there's literally nothing to be said on your side of the issue. So, yeah, that's a problem. I am not a court watcher.
Yes.
I'm not one of these people who just completely dissects the background of every one of these justices and of the clerks of every one of these. I don't do that. I'm not a real professional court watcher. I know obviously something about the Supreme Court. I study constitutional law, but I'm not hyper-focused in on the Supreme Court. That being said, in the high-profile cases, in the divisive cases, 9 times out of 10, I can tell you how a justice is going to vote before the vote is announced. And that is not good. It means that these justices are not open-minded. They've got their judicial philosophy. That philosophy is going to dictate a certain result. They've decided who they want to win before they hear the arguments. I can tell you even before the case is filed what they would do most of the time. Not every time.
Yes.
There are occasional big surprises. So, but I have a really good batting average.
Well, good for you. I mean,
not good. Not for good
well,
for the country.
Well, all right.
So,
let me pursue that a little bit. So I've noticed, and I'm not a court watcher, far from it, but Chief Justice Roberts seems to be going to the more liberal side.
Yes.
And almost with the idea that he sees his role as a balance. I've used the word balance before, a balancing force, so that the Supreme Court is kind of attached to the country, and it won't push things too far in one direction or another. And so if the conservatives seem to be in power, he's sort of going to go to the left on different decisions. You have any comments on that?
Typically, when a justice is appointed to the Supreme Court and confirmed, he does not move right, or she. The general tendency is if you move anywhere on the political spectrum, you move left. And Roberts did that almost from the beginning. And there has been some suggestion that Roberts has done it essentially to win a place for himself in history. And the best example of this was in the Obamacare cases when Roberts, who was of course nominated by George W. Bush.
Yes.
He was to be this big conservative, and he was the swing deciding vote that upheld Obamacare not once but twice. And in doing so, I think he was trying to make a name for himself. I don't know what kind of name he's made. But as we're starting to wind down our segment here, I will say that the court, I think, has really, because its members have adhered so strongly to these judicial philosophies that kind of dictate the outcome, the court has really lost its air of judicial majesty or impartiality. It doesn't have that anymore. It is seen, I wouldn't say as a quasi-legislature, but as a super legislature. It doesn't command the respect of the American people anymore. It's just seen as another branch of the government to be lobbied. And I think that's a very sad thing. I don't think it's good for the country. I don't think it's good for the court. I don't think it's good for the legal system. And I do not think it's good for the justices who are doing this.
Well, on that note, I think we can conclude our conversation. And that's, I think we have to watch this situation quite carefully. The Supreme Court is going to render opinions, apparently, within the next year. that are going to be mild earthquakes, I would say, on abortion, affirmative action, whatever else, in a very fragile era.
Yes, and I don't look forward to it.
Well, thank you once again, Buck, for
Thank
being
you, sir.
with us tonight. Thank
Bye.
you. Thanks.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves. Endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.